So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, everybody, we are here with Kent with Bent number 60, Kent Hovind in the Order of the Phoenix. What is up, everybody?
Hey, how's it going?
All right,
Hello.
we have a special guest who just said hello. Who's that?
It's me. You call me Josh or Sphincter of Doom or that guy, whatever works for you.
Where might
Hi,
people
that guy.
Where might people recognize you from?
I've been on Kent with Bent before. I've also, I think I was on Eric with Erica at least once, maybe not. And I've been on Modern and Debate once, so there's that.
All right, so an up and coming name in the debate world. There you go. I almost said debent world, but that I don't know what that is. That's like French for of Ben world. Yeah. Anyway. Oh, the last 3 days were absolute hell in Washington State, huh, the Venerable Bean? Well, I mean, I didn't much enjoy Washington State overall, so that doesn't surprise me.
I heard
entire-
that was
the-
pretty
the-
hot there.
The entire East Coast is broiling, or
Well,
West Coast rather.
Yeah.
Maybe
Actually, it's the temperature's come down here. Like this time last week, it was like 13 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it is right now.
At least 10 degrees warmer, yeah.
Yeah,
And it rained last night, at least where I am.
it did not hear it, as far as I know.
I don't think it did, but it was pretty windy for a while.
All right, but we are here for Kent with Ben, and so I want to get into the rules because we got rules. It's not like the street where they ain't got no rules. Here we got rules.
For Vietnam.
Yes, or Vietnam, Donnie. All right. So first, this is a drinking game that we do not encourage you to play. In fact, we encourage responsible drinking, and we don't take any responsibility or liability for any injury or damage to self or damage to others or property or anything like that. You drink at your own risk, and please drink responsibly. However, if you choose to participate, here are the rules. We drink whenever Kent Hovind gets something right without it just being a direct quotation. We drink whenever Kent Hovind says something so stupid it kind of helps to soothe their brain to take a little drink. We drink whenever Kent Hovind has this anecdote that we're pretty sure didn't happen. We kind of call those shower thoughts that he thought, or something like that. Hashtag things that didn't happen. Let's see. We also take a drink when Kent Hovind tells a joke that doesn't land, and when we get a little visit from the Toho Kaiju. Now, we'll specify what things count as Toho Kaiju sounds. There's the Godzilla sound, like you just heard. There's a Mothra sound that is a bit similar. And there is also an option for channel members to super chat with the two emojis, Godzilla or Mothra, or both, I don't know. And that will also trigger a drink. Also, we have in the past done a few super chat, and your name is on YouTube is associated with Toho Kaiju. We'll take a drink for that. I haven't really decided on like other kaiju, like would I take a drink for like Gamera? Maybe.
But Rodan.
Oh yeah, well that counts as a Toho Kaiju.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Right. So yeah. Anyway, I don't think we need any further ado. I think it's time to just dive into Kent Hovind. Remember last time he was telling us about some magazine that quote unquote talks about the things no one else wants to talk about, which probably means made up nonsense.
Let's not forget that behind him you still see where he circled what he thinks is a gene.
But is actually
That
a base
is-
pair.
That is not a gene.
Did you watch last time, Josh, where Kent Hovind said that base pairs are genes?
Ugh. I did not watch, but that's not the first time he said that.
Oh yeah, it's pretty bad. But here we go.
Because they don't fit what's called the paradigm, the way you're supposed to believe. They go and visit.
Paradigm isn't the way you're supposed to believe. It's just the common consensus. You're allowed to go against the paradigm. The question is just, can you actually demonstrate that you're right and the paradigm is wrong? The answer is usually no, because the reason it's the paradigm is it's the view that has the most evidence.
You have to be someone like Albert Einstein to change something like that.
I mean, he did change a paradigm. And you know
He
what?
sure did.
There were people who were like, nah, that's bullshit. Whoops. But anyway, overall, he proved his case, and in the long run, people were like, yeah, okay. So yeah, go against the paradigm. No one, I mean, I'm not going to say no one, but it is not
Well-
taboo to go against the paradigm.
And correct me if I'm wrong. You're more familiar with the history than I am, but didn't Galileo go against the paradigm? But the Catholic Church was like, you don't have enough evidence for this. And
Yeah,
that's-
and turns out the Catholic Church was actually right about that. He didn't.
Yeah, I mean, his findings were later vindicated, but not because Galileo. He was right. He was right for the wrong. But he couldn't prove it.
Well, so his problem was that by assuming that the orbits around the sun were circular, he actually had less predictive power than the modified Aristotelian system, which was geoheliocentric. So the idea was that the other planets rotate around the sun, and the sun rotates around the Earth, and then they had a complicated system of cycles and epicycles and whatnot. But ultimately, those things gave better predictions than Galileo, because Galileo was working off of circles, which isn't the way that it worked. Which is why later, when you got Johannes Kepler, he actually got the math to work better for heliocentrism than it ever did for any kind of geocentrism, which is why heliocentrism won out.
But Tycho Brahe, I think that's how it's pronounced. He had the observations that allowed Kepler to create the laws, if I remember
Yes.
right.
And that's also not how it's pronounced, but I'm not going to nitpick on how people pronounce foreign names.
How is it pronounced?
Tuchel.
Oh, I was way off. Okay.
These places and do research on it. It's really, really good stuff. They've got a book called Far Out Adventures. I'll bring that after the break. I've got it here. Heidi, the ones you cut the pages out, I handed it to somebody to bring out here tonight. I didn't make it. So it must be still on my desk. But that's put out by these folks about some of these giant skeletons and other strange things. They get into all sorts of things, UFOs and a variety of things like that.
Oh, I want Ken Hovind to give us his take on UFOs during this episode. That would make me so happy. Oh my goodness. Oh, please, Kent.
There's a website which you can get about this topic, geocities.com, which is a web host for all sorts of things. But
It's just GeoCities. It's been so long since anyone's gone to GeoCities. My goodness.
Hating the video.
Oh man, do you think this website is part of a web ring? Do you remember web rings? Oh my goodness, I feel like half the audience here is going to be too young to remember web rings. Man.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about those.
Web rings were, in case anyone doesn't know, because I'm sure there are people, because this is like a fossil of the internet. Web rings were this idea where a whole bunch of websites would link to each other, and there'd be a previous and next on the bottom of the page. And you'd hit it, and it would just take you to another website. And eventually, if you hit next enough times, you would just come back. And they usually had some theme to them, but it was never really clear why you were doing this. Like, why not just have a links page on your web page? I don't know.
I think maybe it was like kind of like it was the chat roulette. We're like, I don't even know where I'm going. Let's see, go on to adventure, and then it's okay.
And it wasn't usually just a naked guy trying to sexually harass you.
Yeah.
Okay.
geocities.com/thetropics/lagoon/1345/giants.
That is an amazing. That is just an amazing URL. I'm sorry. I just can't get over how awesome that is.
As information about some of the giant skeletons. This article we passed out here
I'm not
from
typing it out.
Far Out Adventures magazine is one of the back issues about what the Smithsonian has done for hiding information about these giants.
Okay, did they? Because that's a whole big ol' citation needed. And here's the other thing. Just saying that they do it isn't enough. And I'm sorry, but this Adventure Time magazine, or whatever it's called, is probably not enough for me to be convinced that the Smithsonian is hiding giant skeletons. Oh, and Robert Madwell says, I'd forgotten about web rings. Man, back when the internet was still the wild, wild west.
Another reason this video is dated is calling it like there's a magazine called Adventure Time where today that would be a completely different reference.
Yes.
When a giant skeleton is found, the Smithsonian often will come to investigate. And they'll say, oh, this is interesting. We'll take this back and study it. And they take it back and you never hear from it again.
You haven't actually managed to present any evidence that any giant skeleton has ever been found. Like, this is going back to the last episode, so I mean, if you really want more context with this, go watch, number 59. But, like, he went through all of these things that were like, oh, hey, some cowboys said they found a 12-foot tall skeleton, and they didn't ever show it to anyone or say where they found it. Or like, oh, hey, look, this is a picture that someone drew of a skeleton that they say some coal miners found in Alabama in 1897, and they never told anyone where they found it or showed it to anyone. So, yeah. It's just a bunch of stories that anyone could just make up.
It's kind of like Principal Skinner with the Aurora Borealis entirely in his kitchen.
Yeah. The whole thing just doesn't really add up, and you're not allowed to verify.
It's reported in here, I got several things in here, that an entire barge full of artifacts was taken out in the ocean and dumped from the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian, some of the directors seem to have an agenda. They want to make sure everybody believes in evolution. Now, I think there's a bigger picture. If we can step back and look at the whole thing. Satan wants to control this world.
Oh, here we go, guys. Satan is in control of the Smithsonian. I'm just going to take a pre-drink for that one.
Ooh.
The Bible teaches God made the world. Now, if you get a bunch of people...
Hey, you know what? I'm going to take a quick drink for Ken being right. It is true that the Bible teaches that God made the world.
But he's quoting the Bible, though. So...
No, because that phrase doesn't...
He's quoting something.
No, not directly.
I mean, doesn't
Right.
Jesus... Isn't it somewhere in the New Testament where because we got... Oh, no, it's because God loved the world.
Drink for God's love.
Oh. Yeah.
You're thinking of Austin 3:19, I think, or something like that?
That's
is that
similar.
Okay.
John, yeah.
Oh, John.
I know that if we added a rule to the drinking game where we drink every time Kent projects, everyone would die.
Yeah, we
whether
can't
you're
do
drinking
that.
alcohol or not. You would just you can't
Water
consume that much
toxicity
fluid,
is
right.
Yeah. You will die of alcohol poisoning or hyponatremia.
Yeah, right.
people together who believe God made the world. They believe they have rights that came from God. Those people don't make good slaves. Eventually, they will throw the tea in the harbor and rebel against the king, right? Like,
Actually, so here's a thing. The rights that the colonists said that they had, they actually derived primarily from the Magna Carta and not the Bible. They later wrote down rights that some of them believed that they had by virtue of being created in the image of God, but they weren't the rights that they were trying to protect from the Magna Carta. So one of the things about the Magna Carta is that it requires that there be some kind of peer representation and also jury by peers, which people don't always seem to get right. So jury by peer in terms of the Magna Carta means if you're a nobleman, your peers are other noblemen. They're the ones who try you, as if you're a jury. If you're a member of the clergy, you should be judged by other clergymen. If you're a commoner, you should be judged by other commoners. If you're like if you're a citizen of a particular city, then other citizens of the city should be the ones who are on your jury, things like that. That's where the United States gets the idea that juries should be drawn from the district in which the crime happens, which is also why there is a county in the United States where technically no jury can ever be drawn. So it's not actually clear if you could ever be prosecuted for a crime there, because that county happens to be in a national park with an actual resident population of 0. So
Perfect crime.
I'm not going to tell you where it is, in case anyone decides to go lure someone out there and do horrible things. That's still a no-no. Don't do it. But, yeah, so there's that. But then there was the... Oh, sorry.
That's not where Dinosaur Adventureland is.
No.
Is it?
No. Because that's near Lenox, Alabama, which has a population of, like, 40 or something. Which is more than 12, which means you can get a jury going.
Wait, is it an adult population of 40 though?
That's a good question. I mean, even if it's not, it's probably still like an adult population of like 20 or something, which is still more than enough for a jury.
It's probably more than enough for a jury.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the city. It's usually like a county-wide thing. But anyway, also the Venerable Bee points out, also heavily influenced by the English Bill of Rights of 1689 to 1690. Yes, that's also true. But with the representation thing, the idea was that during one of the many English revolutions, and I don't want to get into the whole history of English law, But most English revolutions have come over something to do with people not wanting to pay taxes because they don't feel like they were fair. So one of the things that was set in place as part of the quote-unquote Constitution of England, which isn't a written constitution, it's a series of norms, but as part of the Constitution of England, was that you couldn't tax a population unless they consented to it. And the way that you could tell if they consented to it was because they were able to send a representative to Parliament, and all taxation proposals had to be passed through Parliament. And of course, then the people in the colonies said, well, we have no representatives in Parliament, therefore we can't be said to consent to this taxation, therefore we don't have to pay the taxation. And then, of course, King George's forces responded with, well, what if we shoot you if you don't? And that's how you start a war. Or at least if you have people that you're telling that to who are willing to shoot back. That's the key part. And that's, yeah, how you get a war. But no, none of these things were from God, because if you look at, say, the governments that God has blessed in the Bible, like King Solomon or King Saul or King David, yeah, they didn't have a parliament that approved their tax plans. So I don't think God actually, and even in the New Testament, when Jesus says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, yeah, the people he was talking to didn't exactly have representatives in the Roman Senate, because only Roman citizens had that, and only if you actually lived in Rome. Because you couldn't vote for Senate if you were out somewhere else, even if you were a Roman citizen. There were no mail-in ballots in the ancient Roman Empire. And even if you did have representation on the Senate, for a lot of the Roman Empire's history, that meant virtually nothing, because the Senate essentially had no power, to the point that one Roman emperor didn't wait for an election, appointed his horse to the Senate.
Oh, Caligula.
Yep.
That quote about render under Caesar's that which is Caesar's is very commonly misunderstood along many different dimensions, I think.
Sure. But yeah, to sum it up, it is not true that the American Revolution was sparked by people who thought that the Bible told them to rebel against King George. It really wasn't. That's definitely not what happened.
Our founding fathers did, because they had a philosophy. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And people who believe in creation...
I mean, they said that, but they didn't really act very well on it, because it's not like they abolished slavery or anything.
Oftentimes get this
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
attitude of, I'm going to answer to God, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm going to try to please God. Now, if somebody wants a one-world government or a new world order, they can't have people believing they have rights that come from God.
Why not? So this is a common trope, and I don't get it. Okay, there's no particular reason that what rights you're guaranteed by a government is tied to the geographic extent of the government, right? Like, there are governments that rule over far smaller people than, say, the United States government, that gives those people far fewer rights. I mean, an obvious case in point would be North Korea, right? So, but there are also bigger governments that don't seem, or bigger countries that don't seem to have any huge difference in the rights afforded by the government. They might have other problems, but like, yeah, there's no obvious correlation between size of the country in terms of population or geographic extent and what rights, whether God-given or not, are guaranteed and actually delivered effectively to the citizens or subjects of that government. So I don't see any particular reason why a world government couldn't guarantee all the rights that Kent Hovind would like. Now, I do think that there's an economy of scale, and eventually you're going to hit a tipping point where your country is so big that it's hard to effectively govern. And I'll be honest, I think the United States hit that point decades ago, but that's a different discussion. Yes, that I'm getting unusually political in saying I am okay with the United States being split into 4 or 5 different countries. I think it would be an improvement for all of those people.
Federation
Sure.
of federated states. Yeah.
I just think that it's kind of ridiculous that people in California are subject to some degree to the will of the voters in like Alabama. Like, why should that be the case? That's crazy.
And vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to get everybody to believe that your rights come from the government.
Well, you don't have to get everyone to believe all of your rights came from the government, but the right to things like no taxation without representation definitely didn't come from God, because you can't find that in the Bible, but you can find it in the legal history of, England.
And so evolution is a foundation philosophy for communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism.
All right, well, we're going to take a drink and then get into how stupid that was.
Oh.
All right, so, first of all, most of the socialist philosophy that went on, that laid the groundwork for socialism, happened before evolution was widely accepted, and in many cases before it was even proposed seriously. So a lot of the, for instance, socialism really tends to go back to various French political philosophers, and you had the scientific and the, I guess, philosophical socialists. The scientific ones were the ones who you can take at least semi-seriously. The other ones were the ones who thought that the sea would turn into lemonade, and that chickens would pluck themselves and rush into your oven, and that lions would be as tame as horses under socialism. The scientific socialists were a little bit more like, well, maybe chemistry and the actual behaviors of other animals and humans might not change under socialism. But yeah, either way, there was not any kind of underpinning of evolutionary thought, because evolution largely hadn't been proposed when these ideas were becoming solidified. In terms of Marxism, famously, all of the earliest Marxist leaders, like Mao and Lenin, implemented anti-evolutionary measures because they thought that evolution was actually an excuse for capitalism. And that, in fact, they did things like say, oh, crops are part of the working class, and they won't compete against each other unless they're forced to. So you can plant seeds as close together as you want, and you don't have to worry about fertilizer because they're going to cooperate with each other. Yeah, that's not how plants work. And that's one of the reasons that Soviet farms wouldn't produce as much food after they were collectivized. Now, another problem was just that, I mean, you have incentive structure problems, and you have distribution problems and pricing problems and all that. But it also didn't help that their farming techniques were completely impossible, even if you had all those things settled. As for evolution, in fact, well, it's hard to actually pin down what, if any, religion, say, the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party actually followed. He never said anything to indicate that he accepted evolution. In fact, he explicitly rejected it in numerous writings, and instead believed that there was some creator who had created the races, and that mixing them was going against the will of that creator. Now, I do think that he probably wasn't something you could describe as an atheist. I do think he was some kind of theist, but I am hesitant to say that he followed any particular branch of theism that is established, because he kind of contradicted himself on a lot of that stuff in various settings. So we'll go there. But so yeah, I don't really think it's fair to blame it on any particular branch of, say, Christianity. But yeah, you definitely can't lay it at the feet of evolution or atheism, because he rejected all of that. I think that covers everything he said.
I think he makes this conclusion, and I've heard it before, so I am making some assumptions. But essentially, the major practitioners of those views in history, they tend to hold a what's the word I'm looking for? A humanist view where people are just pawns on a board. And they don't, because they didn't respect the dignity and humanity of people. That then they must not be religious, and then therefore evolution is an excuse. Like it's a very like rationalization hamster kind of situation where like it's a very much a stretch, but they're just trying to demonize evolution ultimately.
Yeah. The Venerable Beast says he, being the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, tried to unite the Protestant German states in a similar way to how Henry VIII put the English Church under the monarchy. He did. He also signed a formal treaty with the Pope of Rome, which is something that typically didn't happen unless you were actually a Catholic. So it's kind of weird. And also, there are places where he's highly critical of Christianity as a whole. So yeah, I don't really know what to do with his particular theology. I don't think he had a theology. I think he had a political and racial theory, and he was willing to use any theological system that would help to the degree to which it would help. Because you also got to remember, he threw a lot of both Catholics and Protestants under the bus for political reasons. So I don't think he had any particular religious dedication to either side of that Christian divide, for certain.
If you want people to believe government is supreme, evolution goes along with that attitude.
I mean, it doesn't, though, because evolution doesn't say anything about the government or what the government should do or shouldn't do. So I'm going to take a drink.
Yeah, and if the government, and whether the government accepts evolution or not, doesn't say anything about how else the government is effective or ineffective or oppressive or uplifting or anything like that.
Yeah.
But if you want people to believe that God is supreme and laws come from God, then creation is the foundation for that thinking. And I believe there are many folks in this country in high places with lots of money who really want a one-world government. They have most of the money.
I don't actually see a whole lot of evidence for that. So one of the things there is that it actually wouldn't be that hard if all of the elites of the world really did want a one-world government for them to get it. Because, I mean, they're the ones who pay off the politicians. So I don't actually think they want that. I think they like the idea that they can do things like put some of their money in like a Swiss bank account to hide it from the feds.
I think Kent wants a one world government. He wants to run it.
Oh, that would be an interesting question to ask him, if you could get him to actually say, anything honest.
I mean, he does feel like he's trying to proselytize anyone he can. He wants one world religion.
They would like the rest of it. And so they want everybody to be their slaves. They want to be the elite, and we will be the rice farmers, those that they allow to live, however many that's going to be.
I love these weird fevered delusions about depopulation. I don't know who is going with this. The only place I can see this is like you get it on like the Georgia Guidestone that no one actually cares about. So
Sometimes I wonder if he's just going to keep going and going until someone stops him.
I mean, I feel like what we're watching this series, the CSE classroom series, is just what happens when Kent Hovind doesn't have time limit. Because if you think about it, we've gone through 12 hours of this CSE classroom material.
Oh man, I lost count.
Well, we're on episode 10, and some of them have been more than an hour.
Okay.
So that's why I'm estimating about 12. So somewhere between 10, or I'd say somewhere between 9 and 12 hours of this. And this is just Kent Hovind with no time limit. Because he knows he can just call these kids back. Next week, guys. Next week, I'll give you some more craisins.
Whatever they need, And so there's a real strong push among some of these institutions like Smithsonian, and probably everybody that works there doesn't know this. And
Yes, because a branch of the United States government is so interested in the overthrow of the United States government. I'm just taking a drink.
He doesn't care. But there are certainly some who would say, look, we want people to believe in evolution theory. This is the worldview we're going to push.
Or it could just be that, museum curators want to be scientifically accurate. Oh, drink for Godzilla.
That's crazy talk. That's crazy talk.
And anything that goes against this theory, we'll just have to, get rid of that information. Now, evolution teaches man started off itty-bitty, and we're evolving and getting bigger and better and stronger. Isn't that what the theory teaches?
Well, no, actually, it says humans almost certainly got much, much, much weaker. So you can see this with a technique called phylogenetic bracketing, right? So humans have a particularly low muscle density among the hominids, or the great apes. And so you say, okay, so does this seem like all the other great apes gained huge amounts of muscle density and thereby strength? Or does it seem more likely that humans lost it? And so you say, okay, well, humans, their closest, relatives in Hominidae is genus Pan, the chimpanzee and the bonobo, followed by genus Gorilla, followed by the orangutans, genus Pongo. That's what it is, Pongo. Couldn't remember the genus for a second. Okay, so you say all of these have the same gene, including humans, all have the same gene that's more or less controlling muscle density. But humans have a variant version which results in a much weaker version of the same muscles. Well, it's more likely that humans had a mutation than that all the other lineages separately all had the same mutation. So the parsimonious explanation is that humans lost their strength relative to the other hominids, and perhaps that lower caloric need to maintain muscle fibers help contribute to things like the higher caloric need of having a freaking gigantic brain. Also, One for Null says "Ree" for $2. Thank you very much, One for Null.
Another potential explanation for shifting of calories is that early humans, especially, did endurance hunting, and they would just basically wear down, various four-legged animals that they would eventually. That isn't. It could be one or the other, or a little bit of both, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's also another thing is it's a lot easier to do the long distance running if you don't have to metabolically care for as much muscle mass and you don't have to push around as much mass. So, I mean, it's to some extent, it's just like Newton's laws, right? It takes more energy to accelerate a particular mass that's higher than another one. So if you can lower that mass relative to your body size, you're going to make walking and running more efficient. So there's a whole host of reasons why humans might have gotten weaker. But yeah, evolution definitely says that overall humans have been getting weaker, at least since the split with genus Pan.
I remember watching a video. It was an adolescent or maybe like adult, but not like fully mature female gorilla, and playing tug of war with some of the zookeepers, and she was with one arm was holding three full pretty stout male zookeepers at bay.
Yeah.
She was gonna it's a pretty significant difference.
Yep.
Find a 12-foot skeleton. What does that do to your theory?
Nothing, because the thing is, there's nothing about a 12-foot skeleton that would preclude evolution. It does literally nothing to the theory of evolution. The thing is, we just don't have any 12-foot skeletons. There's no evidence that anyone has ever actually found one. There's not even any good reason to think that anyone might ever provide evidence that anyone has ever found one. But
I don't understand why Kent confuses evolution as he always says you have to evolve into something bigger, faster, stronger, and better, as opposed to adapting to your environment, which is environments have changed throughout history. I don't know if Kent understands that.
Well, you got to remember, Kent is basically paid to get evolution wrong.
True.
I mean, I think that's his motive is people give him money to keep doing what he's doing. What he's doing is purposefully misrepresenting evolution. But it's also sort of like when creationists say, "Oh, hey, what if they found that there was like a Pleistocene raptor?" And it's like, then it would be interesting that a group of non-avian dinosaurs managed to get past the KPG to survive that long. But it wouldn't be anything about like, "Oh no, evolution is wrecked," because evolution doesn't give any particular prediction about when lineages are going to die out. It just says that some of them will. And then we do things like look at the fossil record. Oh, drink for Godzilla. We do things like look at the fossil record to see which ones we think died out and when. So, yeah.
Shoots it down.
Nope, not even a little bit, Kent.
Suppose the opposite of evolution is true. Suppose we were made in God's image. Let's just suppose now, okay? Suppose Adam and everybody back there was
necessarily the opposite of evolution?
No, because there's no such thing as the opposite of evolution except evolution not happening.
Seen an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation that would make me think the opposite of evolution can happen.
Oh, okay.
And it's hilarious.
Get back to me on why it is that Barclay de-evolved into a spider.
I know it's absurd.
Well, Picard was a pygmy marmoset, apparently. But here's the thing. That still wasn't the opposite of evolution. It was still an evolutionary change. It was just induced artificially. Right? Or was it a mutation? It was just atavism, right?
I don't want to get into the science of an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation that doesn't make sense on the face of it.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I do, but
I'm not saying I don't in principle want to get into it. I don't think this is the platform.
No, it's definitely not the platform.
Okay.
Oh. If you're 12 feet tall,
okay,
how fast could you run?
Not very, because your knees would be torn to crap by the time you're like, I don't know, 12. You would need a cane just to walk at you might need one of those walkers, where you put tennis balls on one end and you slowly walk yourself through the store. Yeah, that's the kind of thing you would need if you were 12 feet tall, Kent. I'm taking a drink.
Yeah, when you see like footage of like this is the tallest living man or woman, they're usually like in a walker.
Yeah.
Or like
Standing with a cane or
I'm an
whatever.
above average height individual and I already have joint issues. But
Mhm.
when you get tall, when you're taller, just the body plan does not scale, and
if I remember correctly, you're quite a bit shorter than 12 feet, right?
right. I'm not even 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
So
Me neither.
I am also not. Well, I mean, actually, I'm close to 9 feet tall if you go to the head. But if you check for my shoulder, which is more typical, and then no. Anyway.
In a perfect environment, 30% oxygen, perfect food supply.
30% oxygen has never occurred while there were humans. Just no.
What would be a perfect food supply? Like, how do you define a perfect food supply, Ken?
like there's no food scarcity and you get all your nutrients, I guess.
And
Just raining
also,
manna from
apparently,
heaven?
there's just lots of hydrogen cyanide because Kent seems to think that's an important nutritive element. It's lots of hydrogen cyanide.
30% oxygen.
Actually, you can get oxygen toxicity. That's a thing. So one of the things about oxygen is that it's really dangerous in really high amounts because oxygen likes to break down organic chemicals because of this whole thing called oxidization, which you might notice if you ever say slice open a banana and then forget about it for a few minutes and come back and find it all brown, or maybe a apple. If that stuff starts happening inside your cells, it can be dangerous. That's one of the reasons why, like if you're given oxygen in a medical situation, they don't leave you on that longer than they absolutely have to, because too much oxygen can cause problems. Oxygen is dangerous.
In fact,
Oh, and
the
Ben, you
whole
got complimented on your hair.
when you talk when people talk about like the health benefits of things, when they talk about antioxidants,
Yeah, there's
yeah,
yeah, it's to help prevent oxidization. Because antioxidants preferentially oxidize first, basically.
yeah.
So they absorb extra or basically just other things that are doing oxidation reactions, including oxygen. But yeah, so you just can't go around with like all oxygen all the time.
In fact, it kind of even flies in the face of what he's talking about because oxidative stress on your DNA is, at the risk of oversimplifying, essentially what causes the aging process.
To some extent, it can also increase cancer rates.
Yeah.
You don't need a car. You run to grandma's house.
No, a 12-foot person is not running to grandma's house. They might be able to hobble slowly with a cane.
Right.
Oh, D-Day says the lizard people lay eggs. Yeah, obviously. Come on, man. They're lizard people. What do you think they're going to do, like the oviviviparity? Oh, wait. No, I guess oviviviparity could work. But no, I'm going to go with eggs.
Of course, they didn't have a grandma either. But it was just, or a mother-in-law either. That's why it was paradise.
That joke.
But
Yeah, that's true. Take a drink.
I don't even know what that was.
I didn't even notice it was a joke.
It was a joke at the
It's only a
expense
joke
of
'cause he
mothers-in-law.
chuckled for no reason.
It was a joke at the expense of mothers-in-law, because Kent Hovind every once in a while likes to pretend that everyone has a terrible relationship with their in-laws. Probably because he did. Back when he had in-laws.
no, actually, my wife has a great mother-in-law. But I think
see, that was another one. Joke.
the time before the flood was just a lot different. They probably were huge back then. And you can take this home and read it. For those of you watching the tapes, of course, I'm not going to make a copy for you. You have to get your own book from the World Explorer magazine. Keeping in mind, it's not a Christian organization. It's just fascinating research on giant things or unusual things that kind of just disappear when they get in the Smithsonian.
I like how Kent gives this caveat. Well, they're not a Christian organization. What he should be concerned with is whether or not they're an honest organization. Because as it turns out, you can be a religious or even non-religious, specifically non-religious, like anti-religious organization, and be honest, and therefore be a good source of information. Or you could also be a dishonest one, or you could be a religious organization that's honest, or one that's dishonest. So, for instance, I think that Biologos is generally a pretty honest and explicitly Christian organization. I think that Answers in Genesis is a pretty dishonest, but explicitly Christian organization. And it's pretty easy to do the flip side, right? Like, I think that the people behind, say, the film Zeitgeist are an obviously anti-religious group, but they're also extremely dishonest. Whereas, say, the journal Nature is a-religious, and it's pretty honest. So, yeah, there's a whole range of religiosity and honesty. It's almost like those two things don't correlate well.
Wow.
But
A
Kent,
spectrum.
yeah, but Kent is going with the well, Christians can't lie because it says not to in the Bible, so therefore you can always trust Christians. And it's like, well,
Yeah, and
I
drugs are
don't know where
illegal.
my mom learned that from.
Yeah, yeah, and you're, and you're not,
For
and
those
you're
of
not
you who
allowed.
don't know, my mom taught me Christians don't lie. I was growing up. I think she got
And
that.
just remember, you're also not allowed to have drugs in prison. So there must not be any drugs in prison.
oh, so Vishanti says, yeah, Kent remarried now. He and Joe divorced some time ago. Okay, so first, he never actually remarried. Because while he did divorce, he never actually got any recognized marriage afterwards. Nor did he ever divorce any of the three other women, or two other women that he's left, or who have left him more specifically. He's now on to woman number 4, who again he hasn't married, and woman number 3 has recently been coming forward with some pretty serious allegations, like that Kent Hovind stole $133 of her retirement money. Yeah.
$133?
$133,000, sorry.
Okay.
And that Steve, Kent's tech guy, was continually harassing and threatening her, as well as damaging her rental property that she was letting him stay in, apparently rent-free. And by damaging, I mean intentionally going out of his way to destroy. I don't just mean like it was giving it heavy wear and tear. Like, he would send her pictures to taunt her of him having destroyed the fixtures and whatnot in the house. So,
the attic of the nation, it's called, and they disappear for sure. Right now, in Lovelock, Nevada, in Lovelock Cave, in 1911, I'm sorry, they found this giant human skull. The person that had this skull would have probably been 10 feet tall, assuming normal body proportions. The skull is still there on display in Winnemucca, Nevada. If you're ever driving across Nevada, stop in, because there's nothing else to see when you drive across Nevada.
there is this little thing called Vegas. I don't know if Kent has ever heard of it, but that's also in Nevada.
Having recently driven through Nevada, including Vegas, I mean, it's a place that exists, but
It's in the middle of the desert. It's all a desert.
I mean, if anyone who appreciates Vegas, even though most of what people associate with Vegas is actually in paradise, you do you, but I got nothing out of Vegas.
All right, so I'm trying to figure out if there's anything here. So I am finding stuff about the Lovelock skull. In 1911, several giant skeletons and ancient artifacts were supposedly found in a cave in Lovelock, Nevada, USA. Let's see what we get here. I don't know exactly how accurate this is, but hey, it's more sources besides Kent. Almost everything was later lost in a fire, but a skull is supposed to be found in the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca. I send a request to the museum, and they could confirm that they indeed have a Lovelock skull there. All right. So I am seeing it next to a dental cast, and it is pretty large, although when a dental cast is then later put on top of the skull, so you can see where the teeth line up, it actually isn't that much bigger. Oh. It also, later on, same thing, same view. Apparently, at the author of this, which is sidhav.no, SYDHAV, later confirmed with the museum that the skulls were actually normal sized, and that the dental model that they were using to help display when rearranged actually is the normal size of a jaw, and it is no longer on display. You can get anything else. Yeah. Well, they have a dishonest picture of the skull neck with another skull that's at a different angle to make the Lovelock skull look large. They have another picture with forced perspective, making the jaw absurdly large. Um, Let's see. Let's see if I can find some other pictures. Yeah, there's more pictures of the jaw with other dental casts, and the dental casts are about the same size as the actual tooth row on the skull, so there's no evidence that it's actually unusually large. Yep, more instances of the same. It's actually the same size as all these dental casts. Well, what they like to do is put a dental cast that doesn't actually include the jawbone, and then put it up and behind the jawbone, so that it basically, you know that what is it? The optical illusion where you have you have arrows pointing in or out on at the end of a line of the same length, and it looks like one of them is longer than the other just because of the way the little arrows are pointing. They're basically just doing that with dental casts and this skull. They're arranging it so that there's an optical illusion that one is larger than the other. And yeah. After a very cursory examination, I'm going to have to go ahead and say that this is a normal-sized skull. So, that's kind of boring. Oh, there's another picture that's an obviously fake skull. That's a different one. All right, well, after checking in, I'm going to have to go ahead and say that there is no giant skull. Or at the very least, that this skull is well within the range of standard human variation. Because, there are people with bigger skulls than others, right? Like, Josh here probably has a bigger skull than, like, someone's 2-year-old kid.
Likely.
Well, and then, like, how big was Andre the Giant's skull?
Probably pretty big, but...
Probably a lot bigger than what I'm seeing on the screen here.
Yeah, probably.
Might as well stop in Winnemucca if you get close. There's this massive human skull. Your second bone down in your thumb, all these bones are called phalanges in your fingers and thumb.
Ken Hovind got that right. Take a drink.
What?
He is right. Those are phalanges.
The second one down is shown right here on this picture.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, that picture also includes the metacarpals, but yes.
Well, yeah, but his arrow is pointing at the phalanges.
That's true, yes.
So
It's pointing at one phalange.
Well, okay,
Or
that's
one
fair.
phalanx.
Actually, I looked that up. Apparently, the plural, the singular is phalange, which I hate because it should be phalanx. But from what I could find, apparently it's not.
But evidently the plural
It
of
was in my
coccyx is coccyges. So
Maybe it is phalanx. I don't know. It should be phalanx.
It was in my college.
Well, it should be.
where did my
On top is a normal size human phalange, thumb bone.
Okay.
Underneath, Ron Wyatt, a friend of mine, who died about a year ago, he is holding a giant human thumb bone.
How do we know that? How do we know that that's what that is?
we know that's a human thumb bone?
Right. Or even that it's a thumb bone. How do I know it's not a carving made to look like a thumb bone?
Yeah.
Also, Ron Wyatt is a known hoaxer who has numerous times perpetrated hoaxes about archaeological finds, especially in the region around Israel.
Wait. Isn't the plural of hoax hoages or no?
No, I don't think so.
This giant human thumb bone was part of an entire skeleton, obviously. This was found right near Mount Ararat. Now, Ron...
Yep, like I said, in the area around Israel. He does all sorts of bogus archaeology digs.
Ron told me the whole story before he died. You can call Richard Reeves. See, phone number right there. Richard took over for Ron when he died. Richard's number is 931-486-0557. And listen to the story. But Ron said that they were exploring around the area where Noah's Ark is in Turkey. He's been over there.
One of many sites in Turkey that has been claimed and later disproven as the site where the Ark is.
Bunches of times doing research over there about Noah's Ark. And they found this large stone. It was very, very faded, but they could make out an image on there. He said there were two stones, apparently gravestones. One of the stones had what looked like a boat carved in there with a bow over the top of it, apparently symbolizing the rainbow over Noah's Ark.
Oh my goodness, someone in the past who heard the story of Noah's Ark, because it's been around for like 3,000 years, decided to go to a place referenced in the story and carve a picture of a boat with a rainbow. Oh, wow, that's evidence that people have heard of the story.
Hey, I saw someone
I'm taking a
carve.
drink.
I saw someone carve the Superman logo in a tree, so he must be real.
Yeah, I mean, that's the level that we're at here.
Walking away from the boat, there were two big people, and
There is no boat, but okay. Oh, no, he means the boat on the carving. Never mind. I thought Ron Wyatt was saying he was walking away from the boat. So I'm sorry. I will back up again. This is not quite as stupid as I thought it was. Sorry. I went a little bit too aggro on that one.
6 small people. One of the big people had their eyes closed. So they assume this is symbolism for this is the grave of one of the big people on Noah's Ark.
Or, and now just hear me out. Or maybe some people in the area thousands of years ago who believed in the Noah's Ark story because there have been Jews and Christians living in that region for thousands of years, carved a little monument to where they thought the Ark might be. It's just a possibility, right?
You know what I would do if I were trying to do some art like that? Because I'm horrible at that. I would, as a joke, just have one of the people like blinking their eyes or something. Like, oh my god, I'm just blinking like a camera.
Well, the
Stupid joke, right?
Well, another option though is that the closed eyes could be about the fact that Noah got blind drunk as basically his first act after sacrificing some animals after getting off the ark. Because you got to remember, Noah's MO was like sacrifice some animals, grow some grapes, get blackout drunk, get his nakedness uncovered by his son, curse his son's descendants for all eternity. Like, that was his to-do list once he got off the ark.
The other tombstone had both of the big people's eyes closed.
The other tombstone, that's a pretty big guess, but the thing is, even if we say that they are tombstones, people erect legendary tombs, right? Like, if you go to India, you can visit the tomb of Jesus Christ. It's right there. The locals there will tell you that's his tomb. Jesus, he after the whole crucifixion thing, he wasn't really crucified. He got up and went off to India for some reason, and then he died there years later, decades later. Okay, but there's no actual evidence that this happened, and it's probably just a legend arose among, say, Muslims of the time who believed that Jesus didn't die at the crucifixion, and then as the legend grew, they decided to create a shrine at the place that they thought he would have died. And there you go. Now that's why there's a tomb of Jesus that you can visit in India. It doesn't actually give any evidence that Jesus actually went to India and died there. He almost certainly did not.
They're assuming, hey, this is Noah's grave, this is Mrs. Noah's grave. Now, in that culture, Islamic, you don't disturb a grave.
I mean, that's a broadly true thing in most cultures, but okay. It's also the case that you generally don't erect tall gravestones because that's prohibited in the Sunnah. So if you're trying to follow the Sunnah, which the majority of Muslims are Sunni Muslims, you generally don't erect big old gravestones. But oh, turn for Godzilla.
But they did. They dug it up. The coffin was over 12 feet
drink.
long. The skeleton inside was 12 feet tall.
Yeah, okay, so here's where we get into the Ron Wyatt is a known liar and fraud. Because all of his finds like this, he never actually gives any provenance, nor are they usually available to independent verification. So basically, Ron Wyatt makes his money by making up crap about archaeology and selling it to gullible Christians. Now, I want to point out that there are also a lot of Christians who call him out on his BS, because as it turns out, being a Christian isn't synonymous with believing any incredulous stuff that some guy pops up with that might confirm some of your beliefs just because it meets your confirmation bias. Most Christians are smarter than that, which is one of the reasons why it's often Christians who call him out and say, please stop making Christians look dumb. Oh, and let's see. But Ararat is in the Armenian land, and they are Christian at Dapper says the Venerable Bead. So yeah, that is one of the big questions about where the Ark is supposed to be, is that there's more than one location that's been given the name Ararat, and one of the locations is in Armenia. But Ron Wyatt is a fan of a location in Turkey. And Cheshire Vic says, Kent, drink for Mothra. Let's say, Cheshire Vic says Kent has never played D&D. Yeah, I can almost guarantee that. Kent should play some D&D. I think it would be good for him. I honestly do. I think it would be good for him. I mean, honestly, I think it's good for most people. I think it's a good brain exercise. But anyway, Vishanti says, bro, Ron Wyatt said he found the frickin' Ark of the Covenant with actual live blood cells on it. Yeah, Ron Wyatt makes up the craziest stuff. Also, if you want to hear something interesting, there is an Ethiopian church that claims to have the Ark of the Covenant inside it, and they claim that the divine radiance of it has cracked the floor of the room that they hold it in. And people are allowed to see that room. They're not allowed to see the Ark, but the room does in fact have an odd crack in it, and the only person allowed to see it is one priest. However, apparently, those priests have a very short tenure because they frequently grow sick and die shortly afterwards, which has led some people to say, well, that's the presence of God that they can't withstand, and other people to say, maybe they're holding on to something radioactive and they probably shouldn't be. You decide.
Maybe it's both.
That is possible.
Assuming it was Mrs. Noah, inside were all sorts of jewels. Apparently, pre-flood jewels. This seems reasonable anyway.
The more he goes on, the less reasonable the story gets. So Noah was weighing down the Ark with a bunch of jewelry. Okay, yeah, sure.
He's still talking about the carving?
Well, he's talking about the coffin that was allegedly found under the carving, apparently. Oh, yeah, and Vishanti points out the Ethiopian church also claims that the radiation from the Ark makes the Guardians go blind. Yeah. It's an interesting story. I'm not saying that they've got the Ark of the Covenant, but something weird is going on there.
Listen, I've seen a movie where they found the Ark of the Covenant, and it
was bad news.
Opened it. When they opened it, I'm not going to say what happened, but it's a pretty good documentary, guys.
Yes, yeah. Anyway,
it's pretty good. I think
you know what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick intermission, and we will be back in about 4 minutes. So everyone, please stay with us and enjoy these wonderful commercials that I made just for you guys.
Oh, Nani? Dare? Oh, Ojira desu ka? Hai, Gojira-san. Hai.
Okay, we are back, and this time I didn't start up with the opening animation again because I remembered to turn that off. So take that, everyone who says that I don't know how to stream. All right, here we go. We're Josh, you back?
I'm back.
Okay, here we go.
The mayor of the city over there that was with on this expedition They covered the grave back up and didn't disturb anything. When Ron went back several years later, the gravestone had been smashed, and the coffin was gone, and the jewels were all gone.
How convenient. There's no evidence this find was ever actually found. Wow. Take a drink for that. It's just blatant dishonesty.
And so all they can surmise is that somebody in the government over there, decided to go become rich.
Yeah, or this excavation that there's no evidence you actually got permission for, and there's no evidence that you actually did, and there's no evidence actually ever occurred because you don't have any finds with you, and you apparently didn't document them sufficiently. Maybe all of that just never happened. That's what I'm gonna go with. Is this a things that didn't happen drink?
Yes.
Okay, here you go. Take a drink for things that didn't happen.
Ron dug around in the dirt and did find a few more of the bones that apparently when they moved the skeleton, some of the bones, fell apart. Here's one of the thumb bones right there. This person would have been probably 12 feet tall. People say, you think one man and 3 boys built that big boat for the flood? Oh yeah, Bible says they did.
Okay, so now we have people with horrible, horrible joint pain trying to build a boat, and it now has to be big enough to accommodate gigantic people who basically can't carry anything because their knees are shot. Here's an interesting fact. In the scene where Andre the Giant carried Princess Buttercup in The Princess Bride, they actually had, for the distance shots, they had him holding a very light mannequin in her costume. And for the close-up shots, she had to be supported by wires because Andre the Giant had such bad back and knee problems that he couldn't lift things much over a few pounds without excruciating pain. Because he was too big and it ruined his spine and back. You think he was going to build an ark? No. The only reason he had a wrestling career is because he looked impressive and people would throw matches to him because guess what? Pro wrestling is fake. I know, right?
You're gonna have to retitle this stream to say spoilers in it somewhere.
Seriously. But yeah, like, it honestly offends me on behalf of all the people who suffer with, like, giantism that Kent Hovind is just portraying what is actually a horrible, horrible problem that comes with extreme reductions in quality of life and physical ability.
And a young death, too.
Yeah, and a young death. To just being awesome and able to basically be a Superman. Nope. Sorry, this isn't D&D. Giants don't get to have huge amounts of strength and endurance and whatnot. Real giants in the real world, who are much smaller than what Kent is proposing, are basically crippled.
I think it's probably because they look at like the small number of animals that are bigger than humans. Like, well, see, they're bigger, and like tigers are probably bigger than humans, and they just run around and do all this cool stuff. And elephants, giraffes,
But here's the thing: like, elephants and cattle and whatnot are actually much much weaker pound for pound than humans are.
It's true.
Like,
and not only that, but like if an elephant falls awkwardly, they might die.
Yep.
So
yeah, damage from fall increases exponentially with mass, not linearly. Basically, the reason that elephants can't run is because doing so, now they can walk fast, but the actual running gait that you see in quadrupeds, elephants never do it because it would shatter their leg bones.
And conversely, if you see like in a nature show with like those beetles that fight for mates, and one of them just chucks it off a tree and they fall like 40 feet, and the beetle lands and it's fine because it has so little mass, it builds up very little kinetic energy, but does very little damage to them.
Yep.
Its terminal velocity is not dangerous, and there's a lot of small insects that they could just theoretically like fall out of a plane and just kind of wait a long time until they land.
Just fine.
Time to walk around now.
Ironically, if you want something sturdy relative to its body size, insects are much sturdy.
Yeah, bigger is not better, is basically the summation of this. But Kent cannot, for some reason, Kent seems to think that size really does matter in ways that it does not.
Of course, they could have hired help too. People work for heathens and heathen work for save people all the time, and vice versa.
I mean, I'll actually give him that one. I do think that if this Noah's Ark story actually happened, the fact that there was 8 people supposedly building the Ark is actually not a great objection, because yeah, you could have hired a lot of people hypothetically.
Doesn't the Bible say it took them 120 years to build, though?
Something like that. But even with that, that can still be helped along with contractors. So even if it were, take a drink from Mothra. So yeah, even if there were that problem.
But some people say, well, 1 man and 3 boys couldn't build a boat that big. Well, you didn't see those boys. They would have been big too, right? Now let's assume Noah was 12 feet tall. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument.
It's really stupid, but okay, we'll go for it.
And what would that do to his cubit? How big would his cubit be? Now, we don't know the size of the ark. It could be when Moses edited the book of Genesis, Moses would translate it, if that's the right word, into what he thought was the modern English or modern unit of measurement. For instance, if I was going to translate an ancient document from 2,000 years ago and they're talking about shekels, it would make sense for me to write it in English as dollars and cents, right? So it could be that Moses edited Genesis and he might have used what's called the Egyptian cubit, which was 20.6 inches. My cubit happens to be very close to that, 21 inches. 20.6 inches is an Egyptian cubit. The standard Hebrew cubit seems to be 18 inches. Everybody's cubit is slightly different, but that's, who cares? Anyway.
Make a point.
The ark might have been really big. This thigh bone, let's see. John, would you grab that off the table over there? I'm wired in here.
The ark might have been really big.
That's the whole point.
Well, that's kind of dumb. I mean, like, so hands is a unit of measurement, like old unit of measurement for like horses, but it was still standardized. The fact that it was based on an average, but it's not like, how big was the hand of the person who measured the horse? Like, no one asks.
Well, today that's the case, but it's not always been the case that units of measurement were so standardized. So it is the case that thousands of years ago, people would just use their own arm span as a cubit. And
okay, I'm mistaken.
Now, this did work because most people weren't vastly different in height. So your cubit and your neighbor's cubit weren't going to be super different, and most people weren't doing precision engineering. So if you were like, oh, hey, I need a table that's 5 cubits high, like, the difference was going to be 3 or 4 inches, which wasn't going to matter. So
this is a replica of a thigh bone that was given to me. Joe Taylor, his phone number there, he makes the castings of this thing. That's good. Just bring it up right there, yeah. And if you see...
It's a replica from a giant skeleton found in Egypt. Okay. What's the provenance? Also, from Eric the Tyrannoceratops for $4.99, we have... How do you both interpret the flood account? Just a local flood or an entire allegory? We need to do another video together sometime. I don't have a interpretation of the flood account that I am willing to put my name to as Dapper Dino. Dapper Dino does not have an official take on the flood account. I do think that a legendary memory of a significant but still local flood is a reasonable interpretation. I think a completely legendary account that is put in for polemical and theological reasons is a reasonable interpretation. I also do actually think it's a reasonable interpretation to say that the person who wrote the text actually thought it was a historical event and was just trying to record what he thought of as real history. But I don't take a stand as to which of those is the one true way to interpret Genesis. You guys?
It sounds pretty reasonable to me. Like, I used to believe in basically everything Kent says, and it seems like scientific evidence strongly suggests there was no global flood. But is it a local flood? Is it an allegory? You know, I don't know. I don't really care that much either. You know, because you can learn lessons from it, whether it's allegorical or a real local flood or whatever. But to just take the science and be like, well, that's not true because I have to have the specific interpretation. Like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you guys as well. Where, I mean, it's people can imagine a legendary event like that, and locally, especially in this time, in the scales of back then, where they didn't have a global perspective, it may seem like this is the entire world.
Right.
where like catastrophic events, and really ultimately, I don't think it matters too much whether it actually happened or not. The question is, what do you do with the idea of it happening?
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh, and a question from Kiano says, skeleton of what? I'm going to go ahead and say this is almost certainly a human skeleton. It looks like a human femur. Yeah, so this is almost certainly supposed to be a human skeleton. And I'll also point out that no human could be that big with that thin of a humor, of a humerus, or femur.
Mhm.
Sorry, femur.
Femurus.
Yeah, no, it's not. Who are you?
It's not a femurus.
Are you Nephilim free with your tibula and femurus?
Nephilim
jeez.
femurus? What?
Over there in the corner is the drawing of what the guy would have looked like. This is the thigh bone. It's upside down here. From a giant skeleton that was found when a road construction crew was digging with bulldozers across part of Egypt.
Except it's not. It's literally just a statue of a femur. That's all you have. You don't have the skeleton, Kent. You have a statue and a story. Why not make it 20 times bigger? I'll tell you what, later on, I'll go sculpt in Blender a gigantic femur. Bigger femur than you've ever seen. I'll make a femur the size of the planet. So what?
Or
Making
as
a,
big as Texas.
making a fake femur of any size isn't evidence of anything. This actually makes me a bit angry. The idea that, oh look guys, I've got a supposed replica of a femur with no original that you can find. Look how big it is. Okay. Why don't you just have a pinky bone that's that big, Kent? It'll be even more impressive. Who cares? Go show people a 12-foot tall skull. Whatever. Statues aren't evidence. It's like when I was talking about Jordan the other day, and he's like, hey, these statues of pharaohs at Abu Simbel would be 30 feet tall if they stood up. It's like, okay. Tall statues are evidence of literally nothing, except that people make tall statues.
Make things, and they can make things even bigger than they are in IRL.
Yeah.
In IRL.
I bet there are statues of like Gundam suits and like outside of a studio in Japan. Doesn't mean they're real.
Right. And it's kind of like when people do this in fiction sometimes, and especially writers who aren't very good. For instance, the writers of Star Wars Episode 7, where they were like, oh, we'll make an even bigger Death Star. It's a Death Star that's as big as a planet. It's like, I don't care. Make your Death Star as big as a galaxy. Who cares? You can write literally anything, so just making it big isn't impressive. You need to actually have things like tension and character drama and stuff. Now, I'm not saying that that movie didn't have any of that. What I'm saying is that the ridiculous, oh, it's even bigger now, isn't impressive. It doesn't mean anything. It's just you showing off the limits of your imagination, which apparently are planet-sized.
Oh, I mean, like, so Return of the Jedi had a second Death Star that was much bigger, but it was a completely different kind of arc.
Yeah.
And there was a lot more tension, and
while it was bigger, that wasn't a major part of the plot. It just was bigger when you look at it in relation to the starships that are also around it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the size of it was in the first movie just to be like, oh, hey, this is a major military undertaking. This is going to be a powerful weapon. And then we just basically drop the fact that it's big. Like, no one really cares after that point. So
essentially, to accomplish the threat that it presents, it had to be big.
Right.
It's not impressive simply because it's big.
But that's what's going on here. It's like, hey guys, I made a really big femur. Okay, why didn't you make it bigger? Who cares?
Then he couldn't carry it around and wield it at his audience.
I mean, he could have made a molar that was that big.
It was like,
They
it's like
think
those
they went
molars
across
you
an
can
ancient
see in dentist's
battlefield.
office.
They don't know. There's all kinds of skeletons out there. This guy would have been about 13 feet tall, if proportions hold true. I can't vouch for what happened to the originals.
Which means this entire thing is a pointless exercise, because if you can't vouch for what happened to the originals, they don't exist as far as scholarship is concerned.
That's good, Jan. Thank you. That's a good-sized thigh bone. Here's Joe Taylor, the guy who makes the castings of it, standing next to it, telling about it. Egyptian construction crew ran into a burial ground and found several burials of giant humans, some 16 feet tall. I was asked to sculpt a model based on one femur.
He was asked to sculpt a model. It wasn't even a cast. He's not even claiming that he took a cast of an original femur. He just sculpted a scaled-up femur.
Didn't he say Ron Wyatt made the castings, though? Or is he referring to a different femur here?
This is a different... Well, I don't know. I'm actually not sure.
The size femur would have belonged to a man 16 feet tall. The Bible tells of giants before and after the flood. Goliath was 9 foot. Actually, Goliath the Bible says he was 6 cubits and a span. Well, a cubit is at least 1.5 feet. That's the small cubit. 6 of those is 9 feet, and a span is 9 inches. So if Goliath was 9'9", then the Bible says Og, King Og, was somewhere between 12 and 18 feet tall, because the Bible says Og's bed was, I forget how many cubits it gives, but you can look up Og in the Bible.
Oh, hey, did you guys know that people don't sleep on beds that have larger dimensions than themselves? That never happens. Except most people who can afford it do.
Yeah, like I have a king-size bed, but so that must mean that I am actually like 4 or 5 feet wide.
Yep, that's the only explanation. My goodness. Like, the thing is, I don't even care if the Bible gave King Og's measurements as that, because the Bible isn't exactly the most reliable thing when it comes to things like science. I mean, it is the book that says if you have your cattle, or sheep, I suppose, drink besides stripy sticks, then they will have stripy babies. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what the spiritual value of the Bible is. That's for you to decide. But I will say that, yeah, it's not very reliable on that. But even if it were, reporting a dude's bed's size is just beyond a stupid in terms of establishing how big he was. I don't know if you guys know, but you can lie in a bed that's way bigger than you are. In fact, I know of a Chihuahua that lies in a queen-size bed every once in a while.
Yep.
It goes both ways too, because I have slept in beds that are shorter than my overall height, and I just I can bend my knees.
Yeah, that's another thing. I actually you slept in the racks in the Navy. That's considerably shorter than you are.
It wasn't too bad, but okay. Yeah, it definitely. I think the racks were like size 6'1", and I'm 6'4", so.
Oh, and it's King Og, but if you want to go with King Pog, German Furman, feel free.
Liked having a big bed, or he was really a big fella. But he would have been pretty big, and this was after the flood.
And Kent even acknowledges it. Maybe he just likes sleeping in a big bed. Yeah, Kent, maybe that's more reasonable than him being 12 feet tall.
Skeletons have been found in Texas, Arizona, Europe, Ohio, and in the Bible lands. There are giant bones in rock supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old.
I mean, it all just comes down to this. You don't have any citations, Kent. All you have is stories from people who never went through the steps to verify these finds.
That's the problem, is that stupid evolution theory that hinders people from doing research.
No, Kent, it's that these people aren't doing research. They're making up stories as near as anyone can tell. The thing is, there are ways that if you found this, you could legitimize the finding. But oddly enough, no one ever does.
There's a kid standing next to the replica of the thigh bone here that was found in Egypt. In Turkey, giant giant jawbones are on display right now. Ron said they wouldn't let him open the case to take the jawbones out and look at them because they don't want people handling these things. This may be from Noah's grave or Mrs. Noah's grave. We don't know. But across what's called the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint, where your jaw attaches, average human is probably about 3.5 inches. That's the width of your jawbone across the joints.
Okay.
This was 6.5 inches.
But was it though? Because I noticed a scale bar, but since it's by Ron Wyatt, I don't trust it, and I don't see an actual in-place measuring tool.
So, yeah, I don't see a bananas for scale. So
take a drink for Ron Wyatt, just making stuff up again.
Any one of us could put your head inside the jaw and rattle it back and forth. This would be a giant person. We would assume, or else they had a huge jawbone, one or the other. Up in Wasaukie, Wisconsin.
So wait a minute, I got to point out that Kent Hovind apparently thinks that might be the jawbone of Noah and his wife. And like he doesn't seem to have like the suitable amount of like being impressed by this. Like I would be pretty impressed if I actually had good reason to think that I had found even a much less important person's that I was still familiar with. Like if I found Chaucer's skull, I'd be like, hey man, this is like the actual skull of Chaucer. That's pretty wild, man. And here's Kent like, oh yeah, this might be Noah's job. And moving on.
Moving on to something equally unbelievable.
It's not really like it's not like a point that makes him wrong or anything. It's just an odd take. Like Kent Hovind has strange reactions to things. Like if you honestly believe this, I think you would be much more impressed, and you would make a much bigger deal out of this. But whatever.
I went up there and met Mrs. Ailes. She owns the resort where some giant bones were found. This is in Wisconsin. We'll talk about that right after the break when we get back. Talk about some more of the giants that are found. Let's take a few-minute break here.
Wait, I thought it was like the Packers, not the Giants.
Yeah, there's some sports fans get confused,
Oh, okay.
including whoever sent this into the index.
Because the
in
Giants,
Kawasaki.
the Giants are from New York, right?
Yeah, they're the New York Football Giants.
Okay.
Technically, they play in New Jersey, just like
Yes.
the New York Jets.
They do share the stadium in the Meadowland.
But how come they're not called the New Jersey Giants?
No one wants to be associated with New Jersey if they can
That's
avoid
fair.
it.
That's fair. Sorry, Dr. Dan.
Let's finish up talking about some of the giants that are found from...
Oh, Shanti says Kent is going to make comments about women's jaws being more worn because they never stop talking. Oh, he already did last time. You missed it. That already happened.
apparently pre-flood times and probably shortly after the flood. I was up in Wisconsin. I heard about this article in the newspaper back in 1904 of a giant, several giant skeletons that were found inside an Indian burial mound. So I was driving right past Wasaukie, Wisconsin one day last year, and so I decided to stop and see, chase it down, see what I could do. It's been 1904. It's been, nearly 100 years. But I found the place where these Indian mounds were. They're now underwater. You can just see the tops of them sticking out above the water. They built a dam and filled this valley in with Fritz a lake.
Okay, if he says that this dam is the result of a satanic conspiracy or something like that, I'm taking a drink for it.
It's a result of evolutionists.
The person...
By the way, guys, I'm seeing that not as many of you as I would like have hit like. Please hit like. It really does help out the channel.
that owns the property where this was Mrs. Ailes. Now, she is 94 years old. So she was born just a couple years after this was found by her father, I believe is the one who found these giant skeletons. Here's what the newspaper article says. Near the outlet of Lake Nockabee, which is where Mrs. Ailes' resort is.
Also, not an actual picture of the newspaper. Kent has been capable of having actual photographs of newspapers before, so I find it at least a little bit suspicious that he's not doing it now. Because, well, yeah.
Now, in northeast Wisconsin, mounds were found containing hundreds of skeletons. One skull was about 3 times the size of the ordinary human, and other bones were correspondingly big. Now, this is an article from 1904. So I stopped, found Mrs. Ailes. She's 94 years old, still runs her own resort there. People rent cabins, to come go fishing on the lake. I said, Mrs. Ailes, what's the story about these giant bones found on your property? She said, oh, come with me, I'll show you. We went out in the front yard, the lakeside. She said, you see that little island right there? I said, yep. She said, that's the top of an Indian mound, apparently Indian. It's the top of a mound anyway. That's where the bones were found. I said, what happened to them?
So I got to say, until he showed up, that picture, when he said Indian mounds, I honestly thought we were talking about India. So thank you for not being very clear, Kent.
She said, my dad gave it to a doctor, gave the giant skull to a doctor.
Mine did too.
And his widow is still alive. She's 104 or 5 years old. She's in a nursing home. Apparently the dad kept this giant skull for a while because she said she had seen it, this giant human skull. And then when, as I don't know how many years later it was, he gave it to this doctor. And she said, I don't know what his widow's done with it. She's in the nursing home. I'll ask her next time I see her. 104 years old. I haven't heard back. That's the last I heard. But there's Mrs. Ailes.
Conveniently, there's no actual evidence that this ever happened other than a newspaper report.
That was a brilliant story, Kent. I was fascinated, especially the 2 times that your body language seriously gave away you were lying. And that's why I took small sips.
Yeah, take a drink for things that never happened.
Body language isn't perfect, but it's strongly indicated there are several lies in there. And they were just stupid. Like, it didn't even matter. You're just making up a story.
Well, here's another thing. Early 20th and late 19th century newspapers in the United States are well known for not being reliable sources of information. They were known to just make things up to sell copies. You had to
Sounds like newspapers now.
Well, I'm not going to get into that, but basically, if you want to use, and this is something that I say as someone who has done original research in U.S. history in the time period in question, if you want to use a newspaper as a reliable source, there are criteria that you reasonably have to meet. One of them usually being that you probably are going to have to use a pretty widely circulated newspaper with a few exceptions. Another one is if you want it as like evidence of a particular person's point of view, and that person happens to be the author of the article, then that's fine. But yeah, take it as someone who has actually done his own original historical research that involved newspapers from the late 18th and early 19th, or sorry, late 19th and early 20th century. You have to do your homework before you actually say that this is a reliable source. And in many cases, they just weren't.
Phone number, you can call it up and check it out for yourself. But this was a story reported from here up in Wisconsin about giant human skeletons were found. The Bible says there were giants in the earth in those days. Now, what...
But it says that about before the flood, so I'm going to take a drink. Because this has all been supposed to be post-flood, so I'm taking a drink.
Unless he's talking about Noah's skull or whatever.
Well, this whole passage is connected with the Nephilim. The Nephilim, it calls them the giants of old and whatnot. They're the giants that the Bible is talking about there. And they're supposed to have been wiped out. In fact, in extra-biblical sources, the existence of the Nephilim is one of the reasons that God decides to send the flood, because they are a corrupted bloodline from the mixing of humans and the, not quite angels, because the idea of angels was a little bit nebulous at the time, but basically members of the divine council who'd come down to Earth to go, well, have sex with Earth women, because apparently when you're a spiritual being from the heavens, you find human women particularly attractive for some reason.
What you're saying is that the flood made the world Nephilim free.
Actually, yes. That is basically what I'm saying. Which
Nephilim free exists.
That's actually,
so therefore.
But that's actually where Nephilim free gets his name, because he's trying to proclaim that he doesn't have any blood from the Nephilim. That's also why his symbol is a 6-fingered hand, because again, in extra biblical sources, you get the idea that the Nephilim had 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand and foot, respectively.
Factors would cause them to grow to be 10 or 12 or 14 feet tall, I don't know. But I know a lot of the footprints that are found in rock, the human footprints like the ones in Glen Rose, Texas, that are found.
That are dinosaur footprints. We're going to take a drink for how stupid that is.
Look, I don't know if archaeology-world.com is legit or not, but...
Oh, Vishanti says that the text says the Nephilim were around post-flood. I don't remember that, so please send me something on that, because I am always happy to learn, or in some cases remember things I'd forgotten about the biblical text.
With dinosaur tracks, the footprints are huge. 16 inches long.
It's almost like it's consistent with the idea that they're not human footprints, but okay.
Some of them 24 inches long. Shaquille O'Neal is a pretty good-sized basketball player. His shoe is a size 22, so it'd be, I don't know, about yay long. Mine is a size 10 and a half. I'm 6.
Small feet.
It's 1.
Just leaving it there.
Size 10 and a half shoe. Shaquille is a size 22. I've met people that have size 18 shoes.
22-inch shoe, Kent.
I'm not sure that was the claim he was making.
Well, he did say 24 inches, and then he said size 22, and he tried to shrink it down a little
That's
bit.
true. So I don't know. He was vague enough that I'm willing to give it to him. But I mean, if you want to drink for it, that's fine by me.
I'm not gonna drink from it.
Oh, okay.
I'll show you some pictures of those in next class when we get to that point about the giant human skeletons. We'll get a little more into the giant insects and giant animals that are found.
Oh yeah.
But the time before the flood is
Also,
probably the time when these giants
shoe
lived.
size for men is the exact size Kent shoes in
Don't-
the United States.
Don't ruin my joke.
What about my shoe size? Actually, it's not.
The Bible teaches us that we are made in.
Oh, but see, the thing is, Kent is tall, so it's still small for his size.
Yeah,
That's
he
true.
said he's like what 6.
He said he
4 or
was 6'1".
6'1"?
He said
Yeah,
he,
6'1".
he said I'm size 10 and a half, and I'm 6'1".
That is small for an above average. Or yeah, I mean I'm a 6'4". I wear size 15 shoes. I have above average shoe sizes for my height, but not by much. It's like within standard deviation, whatever.
God's image. It's pretty clear. Genesis chapter 1, God said, I'm going to make man in my image. Now, there's all sorts of arguments about what does this mean.
I mean, there aren't that many arguments. Basically, anyone who's ever thought about it for more than about 30 seconds seems to come up with the same idea, which is to say that humans are rational, creative, moral agents, and that's basically what the in God's image means, because pretty much everyone who thinks about it, like I said, for more than 30 seconds, comes to the conclusion that it's probably not saying that God just happens to be like a fat, sweaty, bald bunkie, but instead that there's something more meaningful about the image of God than that.
With a lot of endurance. and
God is in
intelligence.
fact also an ugly sack of mostly water.
Apparently, yes. That's the second episode in a row we've referenced that one episode of Star Trek. So yeah, and that's one of the things that I hate about this is like Kent just insists on taking the stupidest Bible takes, and it's like like Kent has the same take on the Bible in many cases as like a 12-year-old r/atheism user, where it's like you just took the stupidest take on this text that you possibly could. You don't have to do that. You could allow it to be at least somewhat meaningful in the way that people who believe in it actually tend to believe that it is. But no, Kent, along with like 12-year-olds in r/atheism who just decided that they're going to stop going to church because it pisses off mommy, they tend to have the same take on the Bible.
It reminds me of that episode of It's Always Sunny where Charlie is working in the mailroom and he is like some mail is getting returned and he just has this idea that this person doesn't exist, and he just spends the rest of the day figuring out this weird conspiracy theory
Pepe Sylvia?
instead of actually delivering the mail. And then he gets instead of actually figuring out what the issue is, he just tries to find exactly what confirms his bias, and he's more and more convinced as he goes on. But he just looks like a crazy person.
Well, Charlie Day and Kent Hovind have being a crazy person in common.
And possibly being illiterate.
Although, unlike other people I could name, what they don't have in common is faking cancer for sympathy.
There is
Yeah.
that.
Does this mean God has a body like we do? No, that's not what that means.
Okay, good. Kent isn't taking the absolute stupidest option. Thank you, Kent. You know what? Just in congratulations, I'm going to go ahead and take a drink.
Mm-hmm.
Because Kent could have gone stupider, and I expected him to. So, my apologies, Kent. You weren't as stupid as I expected. Which is a low bar, but...
You don't. Kent.
It's a low bar, but he usually still ends up not going over it.
The Bible teaches very clearly that God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. John chapter 4. So this is probably a moral likeness. We have a consciousness of right and wrong.
Yeah, again, I'll take a drink. I agree with Kent on this one.
2 radio programs this afternoon, just before class. And one of the things that comes up is, if evolution is true, how do you determine right from wrong?
The same way you determine right from wrong if universal gravitational theory is true. The same way you determine right from wrong if the germ theory of disease is true. It literally doesn't matter. Nothing about evolution is going to give you your moral philosophy. If you want to go full-on divine command theory, you're allowed to, whether or not evolution is true. If you want to go on deontology, virtue ethics, if you want to go with utilitarianism, any of those things, they'll work just fine whether or not evolution is true.
Now, granted, you probably would need a different kind of argument for a given moral structure if it was or wasn't true, or if humans were special in some way, but you can still make it fit either way.
I mean, in most cases, I don't even think that's the case. Maybe for divine command theory of certain kinds.
Yeah, well,
But
yeah.
like deontologically and utilitarianism wise, like I don't think it actually makes any difference whether or not evolution is true.
Probably,
And
yeah.
that's also probably true for virtue ethics. So
Which is definitely preferable to virtue signaling, I think.
Okay.
Where's the standard? If we were going to build this room, and I got all you guys and said, okay, I want you to help me build this room, and I gave everybody a ruler, but all of them were different standards.
Okay.
On yours, this is an inch. On yours, this is an inch. On yours, this is an inch. On yours, we have a regular inch. If everybody had a different standard of what an inch was, or a meter, we all had different standards.
Okay.
How would this room turn out if we're all working together to try to build it?
But the thing is that moral philosophy isn't like that. Virtually all moral philosophies come out with like the same answers for the typical moral questions that people think are significant, like should you murder people? Like they all just say no, you shouldn't. Should you lie? All of them say that at least the presumption is no, and if the answer is ever yes, you need some kind of significant justification. Should you be loyal? Pretty much all of them say yeah. Again, the presumption is yes. Almost every moral philosophy comes out with very similar morals overall. It's the little details where they differ. So it's like, say your boss unjustly fired you, but you were the one who had the password to the payroll system. Is it your obligation to give him the password to the payroll system? Some moral philosophies would say yes. Some moral philosophies would say no. It's a little bit of a gray area. You know? That's where we have differences. But the thing is, you can have a society that doesn't have a single answer to that question and still function. Not everyone has to agree on what's the thing that you owe your boss who fired you unjustly. Like, it's okay to disagree on those things. You might do something I would consider wrong in that situation. That doesn't mean I have to hate you. It doesn't mean we have to fight. It doesn't mean we have to kill each other. Now, the other thing is, in this example, it would be pretty easy to look around and realize that you're all measuring differently and then just decide to use one guy's ruler, right? Like, if we looked around and society was like, oh, hey, here's a significant portion of the population who thinks that just cold-blooded murder for any reason is acceptable. And you can pretty easily realize, well, that's not going to work, so we need to get them out of here. And what we do actually get those people out of there, that's why we send those people to prison. So, yeah. Anyway.
Too good, would it?
Oh, that was a
Wouldn't
joke
be
that
good at
didn't
all.
land.
You
Take
have to have a standard. Even if it's wrong, just so y'all have the same standard, just something to go by.
Also, you can't have a wrong standard for measurement. All measurement standards are fundamentally arbitrary. As long as they're consistent, any one standard for measurement is just as good as any other.
And the problem is, America has lost the standard for determining right from wrong.
Oh, and Venerable Reed, this is a bit off topic, but I just want to answer the question. I just had a thought. I've always enjoyed Athelred's the Unready's epithet because in Old English, Athelred means noble counsel, while Unred means ill counsel. Is that a pun? I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
How do you tell right from wrong? Think about it. If evolution is true, how do you tell what's wrong and right?
I just listen to judges and juries.
Thanks, Angela.
What does, if evolution is true, have to do with how do you tell right from wrong, Kent? And
Nothing.
the answer is nothing, but why do you continue to falsely think it does? And I ask it that way because I know now he still says that.
So Kent Hovind, I'm going to give you my reason why I think he does it. Kent Hovind strongly believes in divine command theory ethics. Things are right because God says they are. You don't have to worry about why he says it or anything like that. God says it's right or God says it's wrong. There you go. That's it. And he thinks that evolution would disprove the existence of God. Therefore, you can't use... Kent thinks that if evolution is true, that falsifies divine command theory, and is the only moral theory that he thinks has any justification.
Kent needs to reevaluate his premises, his
Yeah.
conclusion, and his logic.
Because I disagree.
Literally all of his arguments.
Yeah, I
Every
disagree
bit of
that,
it.
that divine command theory is a worthwhile moral theory. It's really not. And I also disagree that evolution would negate the existence of God. So he's wrong on both counts right at first. Evolution doesn't negate God, and divine command theory is kind of like the worst version of ethical theory, because basically what it means is what's right and wrong is what you think God said was right and wrong. And tell you what, in every religion, there's some significant ambiguity there, which leads to people doing horrible, horrible things because they thought God said so.
There's that. But I believe it was Plato, or maybe it was Socrates, that exposed the flaw in that thinking. Is it moral because God says so, or does God say so because it's moral?
Yeah, that's the Euthyphro dilemma, and it was Plato using Socrates as a literary device.
Right.
In a conversation with Euthyphro.
We used to have a standard we went by called "Thus saith the Lord."
Yeah, see, divine command theory. I'm going to take a drink for getting the prediction right.
But we've lost that. We've left that. We haven't lost it. We left it. The standard for determining right from wrong. People say, do you think abortion's right or wrong? I say, well, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in creation or evolution?
What?
Those two
Okay,
are
look, I'm
not
not getting into an abortion debate right now, but I want to say, I know people who are both pro and against abortion who accept evolution. That's just where I'm going to leave it. I don't want any further debate or discussion. We're not getting into abortion. But I know people who are on both sides of that fence and who accept evolution. It is not the defining characteristic that you think it is, Kent.
Because that's going to determine how you make your other decisions.
No.
Is murder right or wrong?
I don't know anyone who accepts evolution and thinks that murder is right.
I mean, look, how many people accept evolution? And are
Virtually
all of them
everyone.
murderers?
Almost none of them. In fact, actually, if we're going to, as Kent does, associate atheism with belief in evolution, which you really shouldn't, but let's say we do, atheists are significantly underrepresented among all criminals. So, yeah, there's good evidence that atheism... I can't say there's good evidence that atheism makes you more peaceful, because that is an unwarranted jump. Right? That's an unwarranted leap in logic. However, I can say that there is good evidence that atheism is not correlated with higher incidence of murder. Because it verifiably isn't. You can check the crime stats. You can check the prison stats. There is no correlation between increased increased disbelief in God, or just increased areligiousness, and increased crime of any kind.
Well, you believe in creation or evolution, because that's really where it's going to start. If you believe in evolution, I'd like to know how do you determine right from wrong?
Well, okay, let's go into some of the ways that I determine right from wrong personally, as just a case study, and as someone who accepts evolution, right? So, first, I tend to fall into what's called rules deontology. What's basically just deontology. I think that there are certain rules that ought to be followed because they create a functioning society. And I tend to define a functioning society as a society that minimizes the use of physical force in interpersonal interactions. So, basically, I think that you should find a set of rules that, if followed by everyone, will result in a society where no one needs to use physical force to decide upon conflicts when they arise. Will that be perfectly applied? Will everyone accept those rules? No, to both cases. And so that is when people do things that are wrong, and now we have to have some kind of mechanism to fix that problem. Now, when it comes to what things I want to do in my personal life in terms of being a good person, I tend to like virtue ethics for things like, not what's morally obligatory, but what's morally praiseworthy. I don't want to be someone who just does the absolute bare minimum to not be a bad person. I like to try to be a good person. And so I take on board certain aspects of virtue ethics. So I might not say it's obligatory for me to be generous, because I don't think it is. Because not being generous doesn't necessarily result in conflict that has to be resolved forcefully. But I do think it's praiseworthy to be generous, and so when I can, I try to be generous with my time and resources to people who might need them more than I do. Not to say that I'm, gonna like harm myself in order to be generous to people. But there you go. That's how I tend to do it. I think that results in me being a pretty morally decent person without a need to resort to divine command theory. But I also think that overall, it means that I tend to do things that correlate pretty well with most divine command theory versions of morality. So, for instance, I don't tend to lie unless I have a really good reason to. And by really good reason to, I mean, like, to avoid actual harm to other people who don't deserve it. I tend to be generous. I don't defraud people, regular, normal stuff. I don't steal things. I've never murdered anyone. Yeah. So that's how I do it, Kent. So that's just a case study, right? That's one guy and his personal moral philosophy that I didn't go into too deep a discussion on. The Venerable Beat says, I sadly think this sampling bias. Poor communities are at least more and more likely to be religious in America, at least Depredino. The Venerable Beat, I agree that's a possibility. It very well may be a sampling bias, but it does mean that we don't have any evidence to suggest a correlation between atheism and higher crime. We just don't. There's no correlation. Even if it's just a sampling bias, we still don't have evidence of an actual positive correlation. And Vesterfreya says, for me, what is moral is I use empathy as a general rule of thumb. There's another option, right? You can use essentially the golden rule, which, according to Jesus, was like the summation of the entire Old Testament's moral philosophy, was treat people the way... So he says it the way you would want to be treated, and I think he's assuming what the law might call a reasonable person, which essentially comes down to treat them in the way that a reasonable person would want to be treated. And I think that's a reasonable inference from the text there. Which, yeah, that's also a pretty good way to go. You're not going to go too far wrong treating people in a way that is decent, which is the way that the normal, reasonable person wants to be treated. They want to be treated with kindness and generosity, given the benefit of the doubt, and so on. Yeah. So, okay, there we go. Now that we've established how you can go about determining right from wrong if you accept evolution, let's hear what Ken Hovind has to say about it.
If evolution is true, why do people have a conscience?
Okay, I'm going to take a drink. Stupid question, but I'm going to answer it.
Because they evolved it?
Right. Humans are a highly, highly social organism.
That's a very easy answer, Ken. Like, I don't understand.
So it comes down to a few things. One is, in highly social organisms, members of a social group that conduct or that engage in antisocial activities are harmful to the group's survival as a whole, and therefore groups that tolerate such individuals are at a disadvantage. So there's selection pressure to reject or punish antisocial behavior. Once you have fitness selection to punish antisocial behavior, you have fitness selection to promote pro-social behavior in individuals, such that those individuals that engage in pro-social behavior are more likely to find mates or simply to even survive. There you go. Suddenly, pro-social behaviors, which are the behaviors that most people would consider good, are evolutionarily advantageous, and antisocial behaviors, which are the behaviors most people would consider bad, are at an evolutionary disadvantage. And all you need to do is be living in a social dynamic that has some kind of relatively complex hierarchy, which we know all hominids have, which is why hominids all tend to have certain quote-unquote moral characteristics. Like, they all seem to have a sense of fair play. They all have a sense that stealing isn't okay. Many of them actually will try to sneak around if they're doing something they think the group wouldn't approve of. They'll consciously try to be stealthy. So, yeah.
I mean, even more solitary primates like orangutans, they still... It's not anarchy.
Well, you got to remember, the solitary nature of orangutans is probably something that's only been true for the last few tens of thousands of years.
Oh, is it more of a result of their environment shifting?
To adapt to humans, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Why do we have love and justice and mercy and
I just explained it.
Would those emotions evolve?
Yes.
Does a lion feel bad when he kills the zebra and eats him?
No, but lions who, first of all, then again, humans tend not to feel too bad when they kill and eat a chicken. However, lions who abuse, say, the lionesses in their pride can be kicked out because that's antisocial behavior and is deleterious to the fitness of those lionesses. So I'm going to take a drink for Kent asking the obvious, and also asking for a stupid example that doesn't actually correlate well to human moral interaction, which is primarily an interspecific concept. Sorry, intraspecific.
No, he's glad. He's going to do it again, right?
Yeah, just like you're going to eat another hamburger, Kent, you hypocrite. Like, seriously. Kent isn't a vegetarian. He eats meat. So if you think this isn't a good example against the idea of morality, then Kent Hovind, by his own standard, is a moral monster. Now, I think he might actually be a moral monster, but, I mean, is he admitting to it?
Well, not only that, but just because the lion enjoys not starving to death doesn't mean that they take pleasure in murder and having to actually commit the act of killing the zebra.
Okay, but having seen felines play with animals and then kill them, I do think they take pleasure in it.
That is true.
So, yeah, I'm not going to give the lions the benefit of the doubt on that one. I think they do enjoy it.
And even little kittens, their form of play with each other is basically practicing hunting and murder. So yeah, I spoke too soon on that one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Plans to. Why doesn't the animal world develop these feelings of pity and emotions like that?
Well, as we already have discussed, they actually do. So, for instance, especially with primates, if you look at primates, you can find them comforting grieving mothers who've lost a child. You can find elephants handling with care the remains of their relatives who they come across in their sort of migrations around the savannah. You do see signs of empathy. You tend not to see signs of interspecific empathy and kindness, but you can. In fact, famously, now, I know that there's a whole lot of controversy around things like the exact nature of the interactions that Coco the gorilla had and to what degree her abilities were actually linguistic, but it's just an illustration. When Coco re-encountered a handler who had been gone for a long time and was told that the handler had her baby die, Coco expressed what looked to all the world a lot like human empathy for a member of a different species. She seemed really, really sad about that, because apparently she had at least some notion of the idea of what it is to lose a baby. So, yeah. And the other thing is, I mean, just look at your mammal pets. The reason that people have things like support dogs, you see it a lot with people who have fairly severe autism spectrum disorders, where they'll sometimes go into fits because something doesn't go right. There's a reason that dogs are often the animal that is used professionally to help them cope with that. It's because dogs can recognize when humans, there's a doggo right there, are in distress, and they have an instinct to try to help with that. And yeah, the Venerable Bee points out capybaras love everyone. Yeah, capybaras do seem to be one of the most loving animals out there. They will put up with just about anybody. And
there are literally animals that will die of loneliness. I mean, like,
dolphins have been known to commit suicide when they're prevented from interacting with other dolphins. They drown themselves. They will literally just go sink to the bottom of their tank and just stay there until they run out of oxygen and die.
I know that dolphins, I remember reading this a while ago, they can hold their breath until they die, unlike humans who will pass out and then start breathing again. That's what I remember reading. I don't know how true it is, but it was a really sad dolphin that was tired of being at SeaWorld or something like that. And
yep. I mean, look,
went to its favorite handler and stopped breathing.
It's pretty awful because, I mean, these stories are basically human-induced dolphin suicides, and which is just terrible. But the idea that Kent is just going to ignore all of these aspects about the non-human elephant world, or non-human animal world. I don't know why I said elephant. I'm sorry. Probably the alcohol. Yeah. But the elephants are an example of one of these animals that has deep senses of empathy, and they have a sense of moral interaction with at least each other, and sometimes with humans. For instance, elephants have been known to carefully work their way around fences and stuff like that without breaking them and stuff. So I don't know to what degree that is actually some kind of interaction on a moral grounds with humans, but it's at least a possibility for it being the case. Of course, they're also known to raid farms, so yeah. But anyway, yeah, these things do occur in animals other than humans. But anyway, we're going to start shutting it down. Does anyone have any stuff that they want to plug before I go ahead and give channel news? Okay. Well, so channel news, let's see. Tomorrow, is there anything going on tomorrow? I feel like I'm supposed to be somewhere tomorrow. But maybe I'm not. Hey, if I'm supposed to be on your show tomorrow, let me know. Because I don't think I'm supposed to be anywhere tomorrow. Oh wait, no, D&D tomorrow, and we have our streamer here. So see myself, Ben Hovind, Gutsa Gibbon's fiance, TD Lane, Cheshire Vic on Cheshire Vic's channel as DM'd by Maddie Science Side Up tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. I think that's how the math works.
So
And this is a reminder to everyone, including Cheshire Vic, who is supposed to be the one who streams it, to schedule that stream and don't fall asleep for it. That's where I'm supposed to be Wednesday. Thursday is going to be the next episode of Canadian Young Earth Creationists. Saturday is going to be another episode of Spirit Science History, which I'm thinking might be the final episode, but I said that last time, so take that with a gigantic grain of salt. So yes, as Cheshire Vic points out, we do have D&D tomorrow. That is what I'm supposed to be remembering. Let's see. Friday, I'm going to be on Sal Cordova's channel, Evidence and Reason, as we talk about the early patristic period in Christian history.
What time is that?
I think it's going to be at 10 p.m. Eastern, which is 7 p.m. Pacific. So if you want to see me talking with one of the creationists I get along the best with about history, and specifically patristic Christian history, let me know, or just show up to his channel. As soon as I get a link to that, I'm going to tweet it out. I'll probably put up a community post. So there you go. I'm actually looking forward to that. I think it's going to be fun. I'm hoping, my plan is to talk about specifically the Apostolic Fathers. So we're talking about the pre-Nicene period. So after Acts of the Apostles ends and before the First Council of Nicaea. So we're talking about times when like the Bible hasn't really been established as what the canon is. We're talking about the earliest stratum of post-biblical Christian texts and history. So it's an interesting period in Christianity. It's a bit murky, but we also know a lot more than some people seem to think we do. So we're going to talk about that. And yeah, so that's basically it. Next Tuesday is going to be... Oh, take a drink for Godzilla. Next Tuesday is going to be another Camp event. And then after that, it's going to be an Eric with Erica. And there you go. I think that's all we need for my channel. So, unless anyone has any final words, I'm going to get us all out of here. That's a no. So, bye, everybody.
I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above: Bob Knob, Ben Hovind, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Patrick Dennis. My patrons and channel members really help make this channel possible, and without them, this channel wouldn't exist. If you would like to support me, you can click the join link on this channel below this video, or you can click on my Patreon, link in the description, and pledge. On Patreon, there is an option for an annual subscription, which comes with a 10% discount. And joining the channel will give you access to my custom emojis. However, if a regular pledge isn't for you, I do have a merch store. And if monetarily helping out the channel isn't a thing you can do, every like, share, and comment really helps the channel.